Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to wait a couple of seconds here, get a few more people in the room, but we just want to say welcome to you, students, faculty, administrators, and friends and family of MiraCosta. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our Black History Month celebration event. We are thrilled and happy and excited to have Don Love sharing with us, sharing his knowledge and a little bit about his background. And I hope and I believe that you'll enjoy everything that he has to say. We had a great session this morning, and we're looking forward to another great one this evening. Just before I turn over to Don, I just want to share a bit of housekeeping information with you. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there is a Q&A button, also a raise hand button. Don will have some minutes at the end of his presentation for questions and answers. And so we ask, if you have a specific question during his presentation, we ask that you write it in the Q&A section, and we'll read it to him at the end. Also, if you would prefer to speak to him directly and ask your question directly to Don, just raise your hand and we will give you the opportunity to unmute your mic and talk to him directly that way. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn over to Don, let him introduce himself and get started.
Thank you. First, let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. Okay. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll sit at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. I love this poem. I love this author. This is a poem by Langston Hughes. It was first published in 1926 during the height of what is known as the Harlem Renaissance. This poem portrays a Black man experiencing racism in America. In the poem, the white people deny the speaker both a literal and metaphorical seat at the table. The verse that says, they send me to eat in the kitchen, alludes to the common practice of racial segregation during the 20th century. This is a time when African Americans faced discrimination in nearly every aspect of their lives. However, the speaker affirms that he is just as much a part of America as white people, and that soon the rest of the country will be forced to acknowledge the beauty and the strength of Black people. I think that this poem is a great way to launch into my presentation this evening. So, I too am America. Sawubona. Sawubona is a Zulu word, a South African greeting that means I see you. This is a word that was taught to me by a student of ours here at MiraCosta, probably about 6-7 years ago now. He was from South Africa, and he was speaking during one of our porch talks, and he said, in my country, we say Sawubona, which means I see you, but it's much deeper than just this physical, me seeing you, you seeing me. It talks about our shared humanity. I see everything that makes you who you are. I see our shared humanity together. I see our shared struggles. And as he's talking, I'm like, man, that's pretty deep. That's a great way to greet each other, right? So it's a little better than just saying hello and then you move on and you don't even think about that person again, right? This Sawubona is a greeting that says, no, take that moment, truly see each other in the moment. So good evening, everyone. My name is Don Love, and I serve as the counselor and coordinator for the Umoja program. And that greeting, Sawubona, is a greeting that I use with my students, and in fact, a greeting that we use in the Umoja community throughout the state. Umoja is a program that is designed to improve the outcomes for Black students in California community colleges, and I have the honor of serving as the counselor coordinator for our program. I'm honored to have the opportunity here to share a little bit about this Black history. And I mean, I'm really talking as a layperson. I want to thank Professor Gay for inviting me. As I shared this morning, this is not something that I typically do. In fact, I usually would always offer to find, if someone asked me to speak, I would find someone. I said, no, I have somebody who would be great. And they would be great. They were great. But my goal for 2022 was step out of my comfort zone a little bit more and tackle some things that I typically wouldn't do. And of course, you know, the minute you say something like that, opportunity kind of knocks, and Ruth sends me an email, and here I am. So I appreciate her for thinking of me and giving me this opportunity. I want to say up front, I'm not a historian. I'm someone who used to have a strong dislike. And when I say dislike, I will use the hate word because I don't think I'd use hate, that word, in my life other than to describe my hatred for history. And I know that's harsh, but that's how I felt about it. My middle school, my high school years, history was just so drab, and my instructors had no passion, and I certainly couldn't make any connections to my own story in there. So I truly hated it because it was just, for me, it was memorizing dates that were kind of irrelevant to me. That all changed when I took a U.S. history class in my first year at San Diego Mesa College, right out of high school. On the first day of the class, the professor, who was a young white professor who wanted to get everyone else excited about history. And so as he was going through the syllabus, he would drop a little historical knowledge about the various topics we were going to cover during the semester. The short bit of information that he provided about African-American history really captured my attention because he shared some facts that I had never heard before. And I just remember leaving the class that day and thinking to myself, what else do I not know about my own history? What else do I not just know in general about history that I hated it so much? And why was I so excited about this class that I previously had despised? I recall sitting in that first year. I was sitting in every class I went to, and I was a full-time student. I was an athlete, and I was a first-generation college student. So the only thing I knew about college was I was there. I really had no other thoughts about it prior to that because no one in my family had gone. It was not a conversation that we had around the dinner table in our household. And so I would say in my whole K through 12 experience, definitely from junior high through high school, the words college never got mentioned to me. And I never thought much about it until I got into education and I started learning more about our educational system. And I started thinking, wow, I never thought about that. Why didn't someone talk to me about college? And I think the best answer I can come up with right now is back when I was in high school, it was probably pretty common to track. And so your instructors and your counselor would say, okay, this person's going to college, this person's not. And so I'm assuming I didn't get any of that information, never talked to a college a recruiter, never talked to a admissions rep, never thought about college. And the only reason I ended up at San Diego Mesa is because when I graduated from high school, I walked across that stage. I have an identical twin brother. His name is David. So he walked first. He walked across the stage, shook the principal's hand, handed him his diploma. He walks off. They call my name. I walk across the stage, shake the principal's hand, grab my diploma. And with my very next step, my first thought was, what am I going to do? I had not thought about anything other than getting out of high school. And it was a very difficult situation to find myself in. Is I have no plans for anything. And the only reason I ended up at San Diego Mesa College was a football coach said, come play football with us. Come play football. And maybe we can get you a Division II or Division III scholarship. I didn't know what a scholarship was. I I certainly knew sports, but I only knew Division I. I didn't know there was Division II, Division III, and Division IV. But I said, okay. And I played football. And in that first year, because of what the coach told me, the coach told all of the players, he said, do not drop a class. You have to be full-time if you're going to be an athlete. And if you drop below full-time and we play you, we're going to forfeit games. And back then at the time, San Diego Mesa College, we were the #1 community college in the state, #3 in the country. And so I was deathly afraid that I was going to fail a class or something and cost us to lose a game that we hadn't lost all season. But the beauty of that was I didn't. I completed, I had a great first semester, even despite all the nerves. And just by getting off to that good start, 15 units in my first semester, 15 units in my second semester, and then I struggled from there when I didn't play football year 2. So that gives you a little bit of background about me and my story. And so I share this with you because I want to make sure that I don't position myself as an expert historian. I'm a counselor, and I'm just someone who enjoys history. And I recognize the importance of people's stories and the histories being told. With that being said, let's dive in a little bit. One second here. Okay, I want to pause on this for a second. This is an image that I saw for the first time when I was in school, but I also saw this in a number of different spaces that caused me to really pause and think. And I want you to truly see this image for what it is. The voyage from Africa to the Americas was called the Middle Passage. Slave ships usually took between 6 to 11 weeks to complete the journey. So we're talking months, right? And slave ships, they made their profits. The more cargo they carried, the more money they made. And so in this case, they're transporting all of these Africans to the Americas, different parts of Europe, South America, the United States, or the Americas at the time. And you're talking about folks who are lying down side by side, chained together, no overhead room, so they couldn't even sit up to stretch. They literally were spending months like this. And it's just the first time I realized what this was. And every time I see it now, I just look at how they were packed in there. They were treated as cargo, right? And so in 2009, I remember there's a talk show host named Tavis Smiley, well known in the Black community for sure. He launched this Black history exhibit that traveled around the country. And when it came to Southern California, they stopped in LA. They weren't coming to San Diego. So I drove up to Los Angeles with my family to experience the exhibit that was entitled America I Am. Hence why I started off my presentation with that poem that I love so much. When you walk into this museum, the goal was to touch on every one of your senses. So you walked in and the floor would move a little. It was giving so that you got the sense that you were walking on planks, and the audio was piercing and so forth. And in the very first room, they had a flat screen TV that was showing this image along with some others that were showing the routes that the slave ships took to complete this journey. And in that same room, before we started going through, as we're getting this overview, there was a group of elementary school kids from some of the Los Angeles schools up there. And there were about 2 or 3 elementary schools that were in front of me. watching, and I'm in the back just watching and taking it in and waiting to move through. And all of a sudden, a number of these young Black children just started crying and screaming hysterically because they're listening to what's being said, and they're looking at this image, and they're seeing these are Black people who are packed in there like sardines, and they're hearing the story of how part of what I just talked about, the 11-week journey being chained together, and it impacted them so much. It was something that stayed with me to this day. The image was painful for them to view, and the audio that they were hearing, the narration. It was an amazing reminder that I always think about when I see this picture. I think of those kids and their response, about how painful and how powerful Black history is. So think about this. Once the ships made it to their destinations, people are sold into slavery. And many times families are separated. So when you think about this, it's something that I know that I'm not, I haven't been all in on this, but I'm immersed in trying to learn more about my family history, because I literally just, I had this epiphany probably about 10 years ago now. So I'm well into my grown up years, and it was like I just realized I just really didn't know anything about my dad's side of the family. I didn't know anything, and unfortunately, my dad passed away at age 55. So he passed away a long time ago for me, and even though a lot of my mom's side of the family is still around, some of them I still never met to this day, and others I don't know. And so I had this desire to know more about our family history. And so this image here about being sold on the auction block and being separated from your families, even after you've made it to the same plantation, but the master of that plantation makes a deal and sells you to another plantation, and now your family is gone. So think about our family history and how difficult that is to trace. And so forth. And so that's something that I'm slowly but surely, I've uncovered some amazing information about my different, definitely on my mom's side of the family. And I'll share it because education is a big part of my life and a big part of my family's life. All of my brothers and sisters have college degrees. I've got one brother in education. I've got a sister who works with kids up in Riverside County, the Boys and Girls Club, overseeing all of their programs. I've got first cousins, they're all college graduates and so forth. And our kids, college is a foregone conclusion. They know they're going. I have a daughter that's right now at Temple University in Japan, finishing up. She'll have her degree at the end of the spring. So understanding the importance that family role, we talk about first generation. And I did not, I got my first degree later in my life, because this wasn't part of my discussion. It wasn't I didn't know my circle of friends. I didn't know any of them who had gone to college. So we didn't have those conversations until you realize your life's moving down a path. And if you really wanted to affect change in your life and change your circumstances, you needed that education and so forth. So to not have an understanding of your family history was a difficult thing. And so as I started this journey, the first thing I did was I reached out to one of my cousins in Mississippi, and I asked her, could you send me Uncle JW's obituary if you have it? And so she sent me both my uncles and my aunts on their side of the family, my dad's side of the family. And I'm reading the obituary, and my uncle was a graduate of Tuskegee University. My aunt was a graduate of Tuskegee University. I didn't know that I had any aunts and uncles or anyone in that generation who had gone to college. And so I think, always thought that the college going culture was starting with our generation and our parents are proud of us. And in reality, I find out that we're following we're following in the footsteps of others in our family. So there's a sense of pride with that and so forth. This is a picture of a slave auction site. And I just throw this in here because I want you to just kind of look at that sign. It says auction and Negro sales. Just property. Just another piece of commodity to be sold, not thinking of them as human. And that's a very difficult thing to think about. This image here is a picture of me. Last summer, I was in Charleston, South Carolina. And Charleston, South Carolina was a major port where slaves were dropped off and sold in this very mart right here. It's called the Old Slave Mart. And so I took this picture in front of it the day that we got there and it was closed. So I went back the next day and I went inside, and literally as we giving us an overview of what we're seeing in terms of the exhibits, but also where we're walking. And where we were walking, there were actual slaves and being sold out the back door of this place. And it's a very kind of, I can't even describe the feeling, and it's awkward because I was in South Carolina in August, and even as I'm preparing for this presentation and I threw this slide in there, I realized I had the exact same feeling that I had in the moment when I was there. I was trying to figure out what am I feeling, what am I experiencing, and it's a very difficult thing to put into words because it just seems it was an awkward feeling because I could not get out of my own head. My mind was racing literally 100 miles an hour. I could hear myself thinking and so forth. But that was part of this journey, is to learn more about wherever we go. I have to learn something about the history, and in particular, learning more about African American history. And one of the other places while we were in South Carolina that we toured was a plantation. And I had to think about that when we decided that we were going to book this plantation tour. And literally, it's a huge plantation, so it's an all-day tour. And I had the same feeling even when we were booking it. I was thinking, how am I going to feel being on a plantation where slaves lived, worked, sold, and the same feeling that I had in the slave market. It was a very awkward. And, I love learning about history. So from that perspective, it was necessary for me to be there. It was necessary for me to learn what was happening literally in that city. But it's also just something that I can't explain. There were a lot of people taking different tours of this plantation at the same time. And I would say that 98% of them were white. So there weren't a lot of Black folks. And I wasn't bold enough to ask one of the docents, do you get more Black people who come through here, or is this pretty much the norm? I wanted to ask that question, but I was too wrapped up in my own head trying to figure out what I was experiencing. And it's something that I'm glad that I experienced it, and kind of leave that as part of my thoughts in my head for the moment. So think about the work. So I'm kind of just giving the surface overview of slavery, from leaving Africa to being dropped off, and now this is what they did. They did hard physical work. An interesting fact I learned about my own family as well. I was up in the Bay Area. It's about 3 years ago now, before the pandemic, and I was visiting one of my uncles, who I usually see him about twice a year. I like going to the Bay Area, and I like seeing my uncle and my cousins and their kids and so forth. But I also have another aunt on my dad's side who lived in the Bay Area, but I didn't know where. And so I asked my uncle if he knew, and he said, yeah, she's about an hour away from here. So I made arrangements to fly up there, and then we drove to go visit my aunt on my dad's side, of which I only have two aunts. All my uncles are gone, my pops is gone. And I just wanted to talk to my aunt. And it was the first time we went out to breakfast, and Once they get through catching up with me, they start catching up, and they're rattling off names saying, hey, do you know if so-and-so is still alive? Do you know if so-and-so, what they're doing now and so forth? And I found out that my aunt, uh, and she said a lot of the family, they actually pick cotton. And that was, you know, just something that it kind of blew my mind. Like, huh, you know, I didn't know if that was something in your childhood and so forth. Um, and just thinking, you know, it's the same way that as a first generation college student, we didn't talk about college in my household. My dad was a 30-year Navy man. My mom had an 11th grade education. We also didn't talk. One of the reasons I didn't know about, you know, my family histories, we didn't talk about it. You know, the uncles that I see in the Bay Area, those were the uncles that I would hear most of the stories from. But my mom and my dad never talked about it, never wanted to talk about their stories. So let's see. So let's take a look at the efforts to abolish slavery and the efforts to maintain the status quo. So many American abolitionists, they took an active role in opposing slavery by supporting the Underground Railroad. And when you think about, we kind of, again, this is a surface level overview, but we went from capturing slaves in Africa to being sold in an auction mart here in South Carolina. But there were also folks who just believed slavery was wrong. And through this Underground Railroad is how some folks were able to make it to what we call freedom, so-called freedom, because it wasn't all as free as we like to think. But this person here that you see, this wonderful lady, named Harriet Tubman, she was a leader of the Underground Railroad. She herself escaped first through the Underground Railroad. She escaped north. She just wanted to get out of the South and not be considered a slave. And the Underground Railroad was the name that was given to a plan, right, to help slaves escape from the South to the North. But the Underground Railroad, it wasn't anything that was underground. It wasn't a railroad, but it's a secret network of safe houses and anti-slavery activists, Black, white, Native American. They all helped slaves escape to freedom. And so Harriet Tubman used this network to facilitate her own escape north. They actually called her, she was nicknamed Moses. So sometimes people called her General Tubman for leading her people out of the South. She also worked as a Union spy, a very successful spy by that matter. And there's some things that I've learned over the years about her, and there's a wonderful movie that came out a few years ago called Harriet. So if you haven't seen it, I suggest take a look at it. I think you'll learn a lot about her life and learn a lot about the institution of slavery and so forth. But some of the literature that's written about her, there's a lot that is not true. And so it's like this fusion of here's the reality and here's some embellishment. So sometimes things get a little confusing as to what part was embellished. But and as an example, there's a 19th century biographer who wrote in the biography that over a 12-year period, Harriet returned to the South over 18 or 19 times, and she freed over 300 slaves. And so I know that's usually the number that I throw out when I'm just talking about it. But again, in reading some other historians, they say, you know, she probably closer to 60 or 70, which is still a big deal. You're talking about someone who left the freedom that she had found in the North, still struggles, but not a slave, and decided, I'm going back to first get some of her family members out, and then help others escape to the North. So that's a lot. It says a lot about her. Civil War. So for many, the Civil War was only about one issue, slavery. For others, it was about preserving the Union. And you think there were, you've got thousands of abolitionists, so thousands of people in the North who were working for decades to free slaves. Frederick Douglass was a former slave who made it to the North, who for decades was trying to show that slavery was wrong, and he was doing diplomatic channels. But to kind of give a sense of how complex it was, because Abraham Lincoln, this was a statement for him. My paramount objective in this struggle is to save the Union, and it is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing all of the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. So that's why the decision to free slaves, free enslaved people would come slowly. And on January 1st, 1863, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which allowed slaves to go free. So again, as I read in the previous slide, many people questioned his motives for signing, but there was no doubt it was a key moment in what was a very complex and prolonged historical process that led to the end of slavery in the United States and gave slaves the opportunity for a free life. On December 6th, the 13th Amendment was adopted, which outlawed slavery. So wonderful on paper, but it didn't eliminate slavery immediately or entirely, because white men crafted other laws that essentially forced or coerced Black folks to continue serving in the same capacity they had when they were enslaved. So there was still a lot of additional work to be done. So how did Black History Month come about, and why in February? Carter G. Woodson, he was a scholar whose dedication to celebrating the historic contributions of Black people led to the establishment of, first, it was called Negro History Week. So it was a week-long celebration in 1926. And he chose the second week of February to coincide with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. Negro History Week was later expanded to Black History Month, which we have celebrated every year since, every February since 1976. And for Woodson, he believed that Black people should be proud of their heritage and that all Americans should understand the achievements of Black Americans. He believed that African-American contributions were overlooked, ignored, and suppressed by the writers of history books and the teachers who were using them. And so, as I mentioned, in my early days when I hated history, this I think is the reason why the history books didn't really reflect anything that I could connect with, anything that was that I could see my story in, and certainly nothing that I could feel proud of. So the struggle for equality. So with the stroke of a pen, slavery is gone, presumably. Black people still endure discrimination and racial inequality. For example, we had to sit in different seats on the bus. If you went to the theater, there was a designated place where Black folks had to be separate from white folks. And then you see signs like this, right? That just constant reminders that, haven't quite got there. This is a picture of Jesse Owens. He's an American athlete who won 4 Olympic gold medals in the 1936 Olympic Games. Now, I'm a sports fan. I'm a big fan of the Olympics, and the Olympics are big in our household. So this was one of the first autobiographies that I read as a young man, Jesse Owens. And I love this, the fact that he went to Germany at a time when Hitler was talking about the supremacy of the Aryan race. And here this Black man wins 4 gold medals, shattering that idea. That was a big deal. But think about this. It was a big deal for Americans. And yet when he comes home, he's given this reception at the famed Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York. But even when honoring this amazing person, this amazing athlete, he wasn't allowed to go in the main door. he had to get to the event in a freight elevator. He didn't get a telegram from the president of the United States inviting him to the White House, because those were the types of honors that were reserved for white athletes. Jackie Robinson was the first African-American baseball player to play in the major leagues. In 1946, he played for the Brooklyn Dodgers, but he was met with all kinds of hostility from white players. Initially they threatened to strike if he played. He dealt with a constant racial abuse from players, fans, and other teams, death threats. But it was his courage and his tenacity to keep on going in the face of that hostility that helped bring an end to 60 years of racial segregation in professional baseball. So now if you look at the major sports, football, baseball, basketball in the United States, they're dominated by Black players. Alice Coachman, another Olympian, an Olympic gold medalist high jumper, but she was not allowed to use the athletic training facilities here in the United States because of the color of her skin. And despite those obstacles, she won. She was the first Black woman ever to win an Olympic gold medal. Fannie Lou Hamer, famous civil rights activist. In 1961, while having surgery to remove a tumor, she was given a hysterectomy without her consent by a white doctor as part of the state of Mississippi's plan to reduce the number of poor Black people in the state. Now, both my mom and dad were born and raised in Meridian, Mississippi. They grew up under Jim Crow laws. And as I stated earlier, these were not conversations. They never talked about their upbringing. So I know, I knew virtually nothing about their lives growing up. And it got to a point where my mom would actually get upset. But if I asked her one more time, and I had the luxury a couple of years ago, MiraCosta, well, more than a couple of years now, I want to say it's probably been 6 or 7. MiraCosta during Black History Month brought Terrence Roberts to MiraCosta, and he served as a guest speaker for our Black History Month events. Mr. Roberts was part of the Little Rock Nine, which was a group of 9 Black students who enrolled at an all-white high school, Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. He had a similar upbringing, right around the same time my parents were growing up, same age group. And so because he brought up Mississippi in his speech, I had an opportunity to ask him during lunch. I said, hey, my mom, my dad, they never talk about their upbringing in Mississippi. I really would love to know what their lives were like. And so he told me 2 things. He said, one, it's a painful past for a lot of us, and not everybody can share that story readily. And not what I wanted to hear, because I kind of assumed, I knew it was painful. So but it was coming from somebody else. I said, okay, got you. But the other thing he talked about was, you have to also remember, because my mom, one thing she would say is, I had just as normal an upbringing as I could have, just like you're having a normal upbringing. And he said, remember that your mom grew up at a time where she probably didn't have a television in the house. It was a luxury if they had a radio. And so unless something literally was happening on the farm where my mom lived and where my dad lived, said sometimes they wouldn't know, because they weren't getting the newspaper every day. And I thought about that. It definitely was a different time. So it gave me a different way of thinking about my mom, in that there's some elements definitely where that there's pain that she doesn't want to talk about, but there's just some things she didn't know. As a matter of fact, I have an uncle on my dad's side who enlisted and was part of World War II. And I asked him, I interviewed him before he passed, because I wanted to find out more about his life and my dad's life. And I asked him about the lynchings that were happening all over Mississippi. And he said, I didn't know anything about lynchings until I joined the Army, and I got off a train in Chicago and saw a newspaper headline. And then he was afraid to go home. So now here's my uncle corroborating what my mom says, is that, we just didn't know some of this stuff that was happening. So it's very just interesting to be this outside, looking back on history, and you've got folks living through it and parts of it they didn't know about. These are 4 Hall of Fame athletes. Bill Russell was is a Hall of Fame basketball player. Muhammad Ali passed now, and civil rights activist, heavyweight boxing champion. Everybody calls him the greatest. This is Jim Brown, a Hall of Fame football player, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, back then known as Lou Alcindor, Hall of Fame NBA basketball player. Ali, in particular, here's somebody for what he believed in. He was willing to speak his mind, was willing to challenge the status quo, was willing to go to jail and give up his fame, his fortune, and everything that went along with being the heavyweight champion of the world. So rather than go fight in a war he didn't believe in, he said, "No, I will go to jail." So these are men who actually stood for something, are willing to give up something, and I contrast that to where we are today. We've got this is something that's in the news every day. We're talking about China and China's human rights issues, and the fact that China is got a hold over all of the major sports networks. The NBA makes tons of money off of from China, and so you've got star athletes who won't say anything negative about what's going on, and that's not what these men were all about. I'm going to go through a couple of these real quick so I can try to get through the end, make sure I leave some time if y'all have questions. But the Triple Nickels, the 555th, this was a parachute infantry battalion, all black, World War II, African Army unit. These black soldiers, they were in the military at a time where the military was segregated, and blacks typically all we could get were menial jobs. Matter of fact, when they decided they were going to put this parachute infantry battalion together, and that it was going to be black, some of the white officers were making bets that you couldn't get one black soldier to jump out of an airplane. And these 20 men were signed on, and they succeeded in becoming the nation's first all-black parachute infantry test battalion. This was a group of men who consisted of former university students, professional athletes, and the best non-commissioned officers. That was who they chose. And they were unique in that other black infantry groups were led by white officers. This was all black. The Triple Nickels were all black, from the commanding officer down to the privates. This is something, if y'all watch your news tomorrow morning, there's going to be someone on, I think, Good Morning America, that's going to be talking about this group of women. They call themselves, they're the 6 888s. And they were a Central Postal Directory Battalion, all black women's Army Corps, led by a black female officer. And I literally was, before I jumped on this Zoom call, they actually were previewing a movie about the lives of these women. And so I was watching part of it before I had to jump off. I actually didn't know about these ladies until yesterday. I was talking to a new student that I just met, who's a history major, and she was telling me about them. And she happened to forward this opportunity to watch the screening tonight. So I was able to listen to some of the women who are still alive. I think there's 6 women who are still alive from this group. And so it's amazing to be able to highlight, the women and the role that they played in our nation's history as well. Let's see. Here, this is an iconic picture. Many people wanted change and campaigned for human rights for African Americans. In 1963, the Great March on Washington took place. And so this is a picture that, if you haven't seen it, many of you may have either in history books. Definitely see it on the news every year during MLK Day. This is where Dr. Martin Luther King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. And as they were fighting for civil rights and trying to get President Kennedy to sign civil rights legislation, unfortunately, he passed. And he passed before he could sign the bill. So now President Lyndon Johnson, the former vice president, he signs the Civil Rights Act into law July 2nd, 1964. And so this prohibited discrimination in public accommodations, provided for the integration of public schools and other public facilities, and made employment discrimination illegal. And, you know, these are important aspects of our history, right? But think about what we're hearing in the news today. You know, think about, you know, here we are, we're in the middle of this COVID pandemic, and it's typically our Black and brown communities that are hit the hardest by, if something negative is happening in our nation, our Black and brown communities feel the brunt of that. So a lot of the things that they were fighting for, we're still fighting for, but we're fighting for it in different ways. I think I'm gonna end with this one. I paused just for a moment because I always have to, you know, I threw this in here and I put it in toward the end because I realized that the election of President Obama had such a profound effect on my mom and the rest of her generation. My mom, I've only seen her cry twice. She cried, and she did this privately. I just happened to catch her when she went into her room. She wouldn't cry in front of us. But when my dad passed away, she cried. She was in her room, and I heard her crying, so I left her alone. And then I saw her crying the night of the election. She's sitting on the couch watching the election results. And when they announced that Barack Obama is the new president of the United States, she's just sitting there with tears streaming down her face. Now, my mom is not political in any way, shape, or form, and I'm sitting there and I'm actually amazed because I'm watching her tear up, and I'm thinking about her life growing up in Mississippi and all the things that she experienced that she really didn't ever want to talk about. Now she's experiencing that pain that she grew up with in Meridian, Mississippi, the racism that she probably experienced, the tough upbringing that she endured in the South that she doesn't talk about, that she couldn't put into words. Whatever she was feeling, she didn't have to on that night. And so we actually took one of the front page headlines the next day, picture of Barack Obama with Michelle and their two kids, and they're all like this in the front page, big front page picture. And we framed that, and that sits in my mom's living room to this day. So Black History Month, you know, that's again a real surface level overview, but I want you to think about some of the things that we've touched on: voting rights, think about healthcare, think about education, think about employment, the things that they were fighting for decades ago, centuries ago. We're still fighting those fights today. And this is why we do that, to celebrate the accomplishments and the contributions of African Americans, both past and present. And with that, I turn this back over to Ruth and the team that's coordinating this. If there are any questions, I'll answer as best I can.
Thank you so much, Don. Your presentation was very interesting, informative, and we really appreciate your time. I am seeing there are a couple of questions from Grace Allen. This one, it's just asking a personal question to you, Don. Grace Allen says, is Don Love related to Mr. Love, the former 2007 principal at Helix Carter High School in La Mesa?
Oh, wait a minute. Whose question was that?
This is Grace Allen.
Grace. Yes, you are talking. That's my younger brother, Al Love. And Al used to be assistant principal at Helix Charter High School. I'm going to write your name down. I'm going to let him know that his name came up.
So if you would like to ask any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and we can give you the opportunity to unmute your mic and you can speak to Dawn directly.
So we have a MCC lab. I'm so sorry, there's no name, but whomever is the MCC lab 1200, if you'd like to speak, please unmute yourself.
Okay, there you go. Hi there, Don.
Hello.
One of the things that I heard you say was you an identical twin.
Yes,
I'm an
yes, I
identical
am.
twin also. We're 60 plus years old, but we live together. However, my question to you is, do your brothers feel or think the same as you do in regards to the history that you've learned from your family members? I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think I know what you're saying. And
Okay.
It's interesting because to do that ancestry work, genealogy, that's some deep stuff you have to get into, right?
Yes.
And so I've done a little. It's very exciting when you first find someone in your family tree that I found records for my great grandfather, which I didn't expect. And one of my nieces is, when she has time, she's really into it. So my brothers, if I wanted to kind of divvy up and say, hey, let's all do this together. No, my brothers would not be looking to do research. So my goal would be to uncover some amazing. I really want to do something like the KPBS show. With Henry Louis Gates.
Yes.
That's what I want, that kind of story. I said, because I'll get all of my family on board for that.
Well, and I have one more question for you in regards to history. What opened up history for me, I always loved history when I was going to school, but I felt the same way you did in a sense. I didn't understand it. I didn't want to understand it. I've seen things happen. I heard things happen. I was there at the Watts riot. We were in school, right there in the school. And I never understood that. And those things really stuck with me, and being raised in Watts, because we lived in Watts then and all that. The issue I had, I covered it up. I didn't speak on it until I started taking this American government class. And she opened up, one of the things that she did was she asked the question, what was one of my memories of what took place, and then because of things that are going on today. And that just opened up a can of worms. But I wanted to so bad until now. I'm like, I'm really into this history. And this only started, we only been in school a couple of weeks. But to learn about your ancestors and your history, wow.
And I hear you. And I will say, I think especially for it's to me, it was mind-boggling when once I got into it, that I just to literally stop and in your own head realize I don't know anything about my dad's side of the family. And so that quest and then sit a couple of years ago and listening to my aunt and uncle have a conversation, and one from my uncle from my mom's side and my aunt from my dad's side, and they both lived on farms that were about a quarter mile apart. And to just listen to them, that's just, I could sit there for hours and just listen to their stories and learn from them.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate you tonight. I'm glad I didn't miss it. And thank you so much.
I appreciate you.
Blessings to you.
You as well.
There was a question. Isaac Dixon raised his hand. So Isaac,
Isaac, how you doing?
We'd like to unmute your mic and speak to Dawn.
Good to hear from you.
First of all, I appreciate you sharing. That was an awesome testimony. I wanted to ask you a question regarding your trip to Charleston, South Carolina.
Mhm.
And how was that? Like, what was your spirit like being in that place? I mean, I know what it would be like for me to walk
What,
into
what do you
that
think it
place.
would be like for you?
I probably would be emotional.
Mm.
I think my spirit would be, I would have a spirit of emotion on me. I think I would be very emotional. I think it would be a amazing experience, and I'm definitely gonna go down there and check that out. But I'm curious to know what was it like for you, and if it would be similar to what I perceive it would be like for me. And another question I have for you is, although Harriet Tubman was a great movie, and a lot of slave movies out there are done well, but would you say that for the most part they're watered down? And that's all I have. And thank you again for sharing, brother.
Yeah. So to answer your first one, my own thoughts about South Carolina, Charleston in particular. It's kind of like when I was trying to describe how I was in my head, right, and trying to understand what. Definitely, there were emotions that were being stirred. Like I said, in my family, I'm not so emotional that I'm going to weep, right? But I just get quiet. And so if it's possible to be a quiet individual who gets even quieter, I wanted to stay there in that moment. I didn't want to, my wife wasn't asking me a lot of questions. So that was kind of cool because I didn't want to answer a lot of questions. I was really trying to process what was going through my head. One of the other things they had on this particular, on Boone Plantation, they actually still have 9 of the original, I think they had 24 slave quarters that kind of lined the entryway to this plantation. And they talked about the fact that they're thinking that one of the reasons they put the slave quarters at the front so that when people were coming in, it was a sign of their wealth. And so literally as you're these 9 preserved slave quarters, you're thinking about how many people lived in basically what amounts to my bedroom, right? There might be 14, 15 people living in a room the size of my bedroom right now. And so you start thinking about everything about their lives and so forth. And it's definitely it will grab at you, but it will be a memorable experience as you have your own experience with. And I think I forgot your second question, but it has something to do with Harriet Tubman, was it?
I was going to ask you, do you think that these movies depicting slavery and like Harriet Tubman and these other movies that they came out with are watered down versions of actual events?
Well, I think you can always say watered down because it's hard to depict the kind of brutality that folks actually experience in real life, right? But I'll say from I compared to the kind of stuff that maybe I saw growing up when someone tried to make a movie about it. No, I think these are they do. There's certainly some directors who do a really good job of stirring your emotions and kind of putting you in a different time period. So, Ava DuVernay is one of those people that I think does that with her films. Thanks for that question.
Thank you, sir.
You got it.
Thank you all for your questions and your participation. It's right about 8:30 and we do want to be respectful of your time. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. But again, thank you so very much to Dawn for being our presenter. And thank you to our students. Thank you to faculty for sharing this presentation with your students and administrators, friends, family of MiraCosta. Thank you so much for being here. And wish you a good evening. And there are lots of other great events scheduled for this month. So please take a look. There's a calendar out there. Check it out and participate in those as well.
Hey, Ruth, if I can make a pitch for, like I said, like Ruth said, check out all of them. But we've got a financial empowerment workshop on February 9th, 4 p.m. You should see those flyers in your emails. come check it out.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.